Kevin, do you agree or disagree? Now's the time to just start an argument with your former colleague if
I'm not going to start an argument.
Welcome, everyone, to the Profit Meets Purpose podcast presented by Constant Method, where we explore how for-profit companies can thrive while supporting nonprofits and their missions. Whether you're a new startup or an existing company trying to launch a product or service aimed at the nonprofit market, this podcast exists to help you discover what it takes to create impact and profit by supporting those who serve others. Welcome to the Profit Meets Purpose podcast. In this series, we're talking about the fundamentals of selling to nonprofits. It's a little bit out of order. Last week's episode was all about demos. This week, we'll be diving into discovery. How do we understand more about the nonprofits that we're selling to? And I'm joined by my Constant Method co-founder, Kevin Kramer, who has spent over 20 years selling to and supporting nonprofits for companies like Blackbaud and Omatic, and also spent time with our other guest today from Virtuous, Charlie Lewis. And I promise, even though we've had a couple of Virtuous guests lately, that this is not a sponsored podcast. Although, if anyone from Virtuous is listening, open. So reach out and we can talk. But Charlie is the director of strategic accounts, was one of the first 20 employees at Virtuous. I had sent out a call on LinkedIn asking for who's great at nonprofit discovery. Many people responded with Charlie's name. So Charlie, welcome.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And last week's episode, Kevin mentioned how passionate, for lack of a better term, is that a good one, Kevin? How passionate you are about demos. I feel the same way about discovery. I'm going to start with a hot take. I feel like 90% of companies who sell to nonprofits are doing discovery horribly wrong. Charlie, am I wrong about that?
I don't know about wrong, but is there room for growth and opportunity to better do discovery? Yeah, 100%.
Why?
I think that the term discovery came from the traditional transactional sales approach where, early days software, you were taught, hey, book a meeting, have a discovery call, show them the platform, review your pricing, and ask for business. So we get into 2025 and we think about the nonprofit sector and we think about the buying process. Reality is 80%, 90% of discovery, at least from the customer side, happens well before they ever even jump onto a call.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about that process and understanding of all of the actionable insights and information that they have about you, your company, majority of that, right, is well understood or known for the most part before they even jump on a call. So when you think about the discovery process, it's not just a one call thing where a salesperson drills them with a bunch of different questions. Discovery process is honestly a thing that just happens throughout the entire conversation. I think the old school approach of saying, hey, I have one call specifically where I get to drill in and just ask a bunch of different questions, is old school. Discovery is this idea of, again, understanding who is this person, what are their areas of interest, what are the problems that they're trying to solve. And that's not just a one call conversation. That's a throughout the entire sales process conversation. And so being able to layer discovery every step of the way versus just having that fixed 30-minute discovery call, it's going to leave you a little bit behind in that process and really kind of the framework and the mindset of what it takes in order to have a nonprofit make a buying decision in order to buy a product, buy a service, and kind of move forward with, again, their due diligence process. It's not just a one call breakdown.
Kevin, do you agree or disagree? Now's the time to just start an argument with your former colleague if
I'm not going to start an argument. I agree with yes, discovery should be continuous throughout your process. 100% agree. you should assume that anybody coming into a buying cycle or an evaluation is coming in with information that they've already gleaned from insert 1,000 online sources. I'm big on the partnership side. They probably have some influencers, whether it's consultants or it's the organization down the street or their local AFP chapter or a forum, but they probably ask some questions and have conceptions about your product or service like before they even come in to the call. I think there's another piece to the continuous discovery. Usually your first call is with a person or a small group of people. And as you progress through your sales process, insert I'm going into a demo here, there's now new people that probably join on future calls. Another great opportunity to recap what you've learned, get validation on that, and then ask more questions about how this affects them as well. So like those are all super great points. I think the piece on the initial call is trying to get to like, does it even make sense for us to continue down this path? Mm. There's a couple of things there. I'm very big on, hey, our job is to help people make educated decisions. So there's some part of that process that's important to them. But for me, is this a good use of my time? Are we going to be able to solve some of their big challenges, problems, meet their goals, or what have you? I try and think of how do I get to that to where we have mutual understanding. Like, yeah, it makes sense for us to continue down this path and have future discussions. But if that doesn't make sense, and that's okay, good for me, good for them. We don't spend a ton of time on that as well.
So what about a situation, Charlie, because what Kevin is describing there is that mutual understanding of like the traditional sales discovery of like, we're trying to see if we're a fit for you. You're trying to see if you're a fit for us. It's this mutual qualification. But in my experience, it's difficult, especially on the initial calls, to get someone who may be able to give you a picture that's large enough or deep enough to make that call. So what do you do in those situations where the first person or people that you talk to can't really answer the deeper why questions? They might be lower in the organizational hierarchy, or their job might be very concentrated around something that is smaller in the grand scheme of what that nonprofit's trying to accomplish. How do you get to the next person or go deeper in that discovery in those types of situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with taking a step back, and to Kevin's point, understanding that as a salesperson, I'm not selling a software, a platform, or a service. What I actually am is a problem solver. So when you level set that idea and you say, hey, I'm here to help solve problems, well before discovery even takes place, you have to understand as a company and as a seller, what are the unique problems that me or our company solves? Who do we solve that for? Who is our narrowed specific niche ICP or ideal customer profile? And once I have that framework and I have an understanding of like, hey, here are the people that we're trying to more or less feel like we've got a good fit and alignment on about how we solve those problems. When you enter into discovery, you now have a little bit of that background and context of, hey, we're an organization that helps solve these 3 problems. Whether you, again, start a discovery call and say, hey, here are the 3 problems that we solve. Do these problems, exist within your organization today? Again, you can lead the conversation a number of different ways, but I think so many salespeople miss out on this idea of understanding, like, who are my actual customers? What makes them unique? What are the problems that we've solved in the past for them? And how do I develop a framework for those common consistencies of really where our product or service fits in to more or less the problems that they're trying to solve? Now, go ahead, Mark.
How do you find that information? If it's a new salesperson who's listening to this, or a sales leader who wants their team to do more of that research and understand who those people are and who they're speaking with, what's your process for doing that research and finding out ahead of time if this is a customer potentially that your products and services can help?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts, like I said, there's the before discovery process that takes place. Candidly, when I joined Virtuous first, I made a bunch of phone calls to current customers and said, hey, I'm looking to join this organization. I don't think this problem or this tool is worth its, weight in salt here. prove me wrong, tell me more. And again, what that does is those direct customer conversations allow me to tease out, hey, no, here's actually what our product or service helps us to be able to solve. So I'm using some of those interview conversations with our current customers to really dial in exactly where our product market fit is and understanding those pain points and discovery. So when I'm then taking that into my future conversations, I built the framework for, hey, here are the unique business problems that we solve. Here are the specific people that typically own these problems that we solve for. And so ahead of a discovery call, I use a couple of different tools in order to prep. Number one would be a post-discovery call survey. So understanding who is coming into this discovery call, what are their priorities, what are their problems, what are their challenges, and what would make this 30 to 45-minute time a value add to them. Again, I'm a problem solver. I'm not trying to sell a platform or solution or service. So typically, at least on my side, when I send out a survey like that, I'm getting back a bunch of different results. Here's where we're at in the process. Here's who the people are. Here are a couple of the data points that, we're trying to capture specifically for what I sell here at Virtuous. So when I'm then entering into that conversation, I've already done a bunch of background and due diligence and those kinds of things. I think the world of AI is also helping us to elevate our discovery process. So there's a couple prompts that I use on my side that says, hey, I'm entering into conversation with this organization. Tell me who are my executive buyers, who are my key stakeholders, based on things in their blog or newsletter or updates. What are a couple of the key strategic initiatives that they're trying to accomplish right now, and what's top priority for them? So when you're doing all of that prep work, you're capturing first-party data directly from them via a survey, and then you're doing, again, a little bit of that AI research ahead of the time. When you sit down for that first call, you've already got a little bit of that framework for who am I talking to? What is their more or less ownership of the internal problem that they might be looking to solve? I also have context and understanding of what are the other key initiatives that the executive team or the organization as a whole is trying to solve. So when I then enter into that conversation, there's a couple of key kind of frameworks that I'm doing on that first discovery. Number one, who are we talking to? What are their areas of interest? What are they trying to get out of this meeting? Setting some logistical frameworks of, hey, we've got 30 minutes on the call here. Does this time still work for you? Do you have a hard call? Those are all the basic different things. But at that point, right, if you're either meeting with a buying team or an internal stakeholder or project manager, the call can look differently depending on who's showing up and what they're really trying to get out of that first meeting. So making sure that you're capturing as much information as possible ahead of that so that you can set the table and have a super effective discovery call or first meeting. That's really kind of the framework that I use on my side.
And Kevin, you've listened to, I'm sure, hundreds or thousands of sales calls and sales discovery. Two questions. You can approach it any way that you want. What's the weakest part of that planning and prep? Like, what are people missing? And then the other part would be like, what does it sound like to the customer when you're reviewing those calls? How does it sound differently for the people who have done the prep versus those that have just kind of gone into it being like, yeah, I'm here to just find out more?
Yeah, I think a couple of things, and this actually came up on last week's call with I think the worst demo question, where somebody came in woefully unprepared. They didn't know who they were talking to. They didn't know anything about, in that case, Virtuous. There are pretty clear indicators if somebody's done none of their homework. Some easy things that you can do to make sure that it shows up that, hey, I did a little bit of research. You can reference things that are on their website. You can reference events that they've done. You can pull those out from the things that you've learned. And to Charlie's point, in today's day and age, there's no excuse not to come in having done some homework. The stuff that's available through websites, the stuff that's available through AI, the stuff that's available through LinkedIn, just to understand the people and some of the the network that might be there. It's very easy to do that in a pretty efficient manner. But folks that show up prepared, they're referencing things that they've learned. They're the other thing, and I'll echo Charlie mentioned, having customer conversations. As a new AE, one of the best things that you can do is go interview and talk with actual customers, their use cases, their examples of how they're using the solution are going to become your talking points, and it's going to be part of your talk track. If I'm coming into an organization, let's just say they're a healthcare organization, it would benefit me to bring healthcare oriented examples to the table. If I'm not doing that, I don't show up very prepared. If I start to talk to you about an arts and cultural organization, it's not as relevant. And so there's some things outside of just doing research on the organization and bringing those things to the front, but also just like connecting the dots with people you serve that are look like them, feel like them. That's vertical, size, scale. I wouldn't talk to a small nonprofit about like a national nonprofit that just like their use cases are wildly different. And I think that's an important part of the process. And I think from a discovery perspective, when you bring those examples to the forefront, and there's a piece in here, I would say, you know, for certain types of solutions, they don't do this every day. They don't shop for technology every single day. As an AE, I deal with it every single day of my life. For me to come forward and say, hey, let me help you through this process can show up in a lot of different ways. In a discovery perspective, they may not know the questions to answer. Charlie mentioned earlier, hey, if I know the top 3 or 5 things that I'll keep with our healthcare customers, these are the things that are their biggest problems. Are these things that you are also experiencing? You've done a couple of things. Hey, we've been there, done that. We see common trends. I'm helping you sort of tease out, are these things that you should be asking about, or we should go down and explore. That's a way for me to do discovery in a way that's very interactive and sort of mutually beneficial, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's 2 interesting points that you brought up there. One is some of the guys used to coach sales people to do all the time, especially in those scenarios where it starts to feel like more of an interrogation of just like one-sided questions that you're asking instead of a conversation. To your point, Kevin, using hey, this is something we've seen in the market, or based on the research that you've done, if you prompt them with hey, this is something that I noticed, I'm assuming this is a pain that you're experiencing, or this is something that's going really well. And usually there's one of 2 outcomes that are going to happen there, right? Like they're going to say, no, you're completely wrong. But then they're going to tell you the things that you need to know, or they're going to say, yeah, you nailed it, but here's like some more information. It's a real good open-ended. They're going to, fill in this space with more information there. And then the second piece of that, I heard something years ago that I thought was really insightful about the entire sales process, where a sales guru had said the sales process isn't a treasure hunt, it's a treasure map. It shouldn't be like at the end of this thing that there is a sale and we just kind of, we all have to figure out how to get there. You should be the one giving the playbook to your prospects about, here's the conversation we need to have, and here's what we need to do after that, and here's likely what's going to happen after that. It does, though, both comments that you have made, Kevin and Charlie, bring to mind a conversation that we had. It's going to be on an upcoming episode of the podcast, but I think it's super relevant here, where I talked to someone who has been on both sides of the fence, acting as a nonprofit and working for a for-profit company selling, and the conversation of BDRs reaching out and doing discovery. And what this person said was, I don't want to talk to somebody who doesn't understand my business. It's a waste of my time. And then they said, to be fair, I've been on the other side of it, and we want our great salespeople selling and not necessarily calling or on those initial calls. So I know, Charlie, you've been at this for a while. In your current role, I'm sure you have a team of people around you that kind of help and support. What are your thoughts on whether or not BDRs or SDRs should be doing any level of discovery before they speak to an account executive?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple framework is if we think about difference of roles, a BDR, right, business development, or a salesperson trying to help somebody through a buying process, I think both of them should be doing discovery. And I think the reality is now different frameworks for discovery. A BDR should not be asking feature and function and technical scope and questions. The BDR should be just as educated as the AE about who is our ideal customer profile and understanding what are their areas of interest and those kinds of things. I think the BDR framework that I've always used that's helpful is the 3 Ps, which is who are the people, what are the problems, and what's the priority. And I think those things helping the BDR more or less to have a framework of, hey, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? If I'm reaching out, again, outbound wise, and I'm having a quick conversation with Kevin, who's the executive director of a nonprofit, and Kevin and I are, in a meeting or, jump on a quick outbound cold call. I mean, the idea of being able to say, hey, Kevin, reaching out here. I work at Virtuous. We're a nonprofit technology company. We help organizations solve this, this, and that. Are these problems that your team is experiencing? And Kevin could say, nope, these are all problems that we've got taken care of. Not a problem at all. Or yes, these are problems that I do have and our team is experiencing them. Great. The next question is, okay, who's responsible for those problems on your side? You mentioned that, in Virtuous world, right? Hey, you all are seeing, lower level and mid-level disengaging. Who's responsible for that? Like, who takes ownership of that? Oh, that's, Mark's job. Mark's overseeing that. That's a problem that keeps him up at night. It's like, great. Do you think it would be a value add if Mark wanted to address these things? Well, I don't really know. Well, how does this problem, again, address more or less, the priority of all of the other organizational initiatives going on? Is this something that is a top priority for Mark? I use that kind of framework to be able to help more or less, at least the BDR that I'm working with on my side, to be able to say, hey, is this a problem that they're looking to solve? Where does that problem fall on the priority of other problems they're looking to solve? And who is the person who's responsible and has ownership of that problem internally? That from an outbound motion helps us to accelerate discovery to where now when we're getting on discovery, I understand who my customers are and how we solve these problems. I'm now connected with the right person who has the right problem and it's the right priority amongst all of the other organizational initiatives going on. It just kind of levels up that entry conversation or discovery call that we're having. And so the short answer to your question, Mark, should BDRs be doing a little bit of discovery? Yes, 100%. Should it be as in-depth discovery as what an AE or maybe a solutions engineer might be doing? No, not a chance, and nor should it be. I think about the analogy of when I think about discovery calls or the discovery process, I love to think about like real estate agents or car salesmen, right? You all have worked with either good real estate agents or bad car salesmen or whatever it might be. But those conversations, right? I think all too often people show up to the lot or show up to the real estate agent. Most buyers don't say, hey, show me all the houses you got. Show me all the cars you got. Like, no. The real estate agent or the car salesman says, hey, what are you looking for in your car? What's your budget? What's your time frame? You just doing a little bit of window shopping? Who makes these kind of decisions? Is it you? Is it your spouse? What's influencing these things? So that like initial kind of discovery before, great. You said you work for a construction company. You're probably looking for a truck. Your budget is this, and your, spouse is the one who really cares about these things. Awesome. Now let me get you connected with this specific person who is an expert in all of these areas, and they can help show you a couple of the options that we have that might fit and be aligned with what you're looking for or the problem you're trying to solve. So I think in short, some of that light discovery process should definitely be happening on the BDR side, but it definitely does not need to be as in-depth as exactly what an AE or a solutions engineer might be looking for on their side.
And so, Kevin, I'll kick it over to you and say there's probably a lot of people listening to this podcast who are familiar with or have been trained with something like BANT. For anyone who doesn't know, the classic sales discovery: budget, authority, need, and timing. And I've listened to some people who have said like, hey, your BDR should be asking about those 4 things before they ever speak to an AE. Do you think, is that what you would advise somebody, Kevin, is like the BDR should be asking about budget before they ever speak to an account executive?
Yeah, some of the framework that's out there has like lingo attached to it that I'm, getting to the core of that. Do they have budget for this question, for this problem, or this need? I don't know that a BDR coming out of the gate saying, "Hey, have you budgeted for this like that's off-putting. It feels like sales process. It feels like I don't really care about, your problems and challenges. And so whether or not one of those questions is around, is this something you have planned to evaluate as a question, is also a way to say, have you budgeted that in some way, shape, or form? Like, is this a planned evaluation? Or you could insert other questions that help you get to hey, we haven't been thinking about that, but we do have that problem. Guess what? They didn't budget for that, right? Or, is this something you guys are planning to evaluate this year? They're like, yeah, we're if they answer yes to that, you can make an assumption that they probably have planned and budgeted accordingly. You can then ask them more questions, but there's ways to ask those questions without going in like, who's the authority? Or, like, what kind of budget do you have for this? Like, I think that's very off-putting, especially in this nonprofit sector that we live in. Again, these folks probably are not buying technology every day.
Yeah, I think
CRM, it's probably every 5-7 years, right? It's not something that comes up all the time. My job is to help you make an educated decision. I would say the same thing with the BDR. They should have some level of curiosity. They should have some level of understanding, back to like, let them talk to clients, let them understand some of the core needs or problems that we solve in the client's voice, because they can use that to sort of tease out, is this something that makes sense for us to connect you with Charlie to talk further about or not? And there's a way to do that, I think, in a very genuine and sort of organic way, if you will, outside of asking some of those hard questions.
Yeah. I think I would also add the motion for discovery is very different for inbound and outbound. I mean, on my side, if I have an inbound lead coming my way and someone is requesting to speak with us, I think it's totally okay for a BDR to be able to ask the budget question, just to make sure, you're in range and you're making the most of your AE's time. Now, if you're doing an outbound motion, right, starting the cold call by saying, hey, do you have budget for new technology? That's going to immediately shut down the conversation and, make it feel very awkward and those kinds of things. But from an inbound perspective, I do think it's totally fine, because again, the BDR, just like the salesperson, they're trying to solve the problem. And so for someone coming in, I think at that point, asking like, hey, again, are you in this range? Are you in that range? Asking what is current spend? How much is the problem, costing, or whatever it might be. A couple of those natural questions that you would have, again, surfaced in any other buying decision. I think from an inbound perspective, I think it's totally okay. Again, they're just different motions for inbound and outbound.
And I think it's fair to say, because I think in the demo conversation, we had 2 guests that were from very different types of solutions. One was, I'll call it a little bit more transactional, and one was much more sort of enterprise, or, a larger, and just for the purposes of the folks that might be listening, if you have a transactional product, there's probably some things you could move faster. If you have something that's a little bit more complex, just factor those in as well. And I think that's a fair call out.
Yeah, I'm glad both of you said that about budget. That is, in my experience in training salespeople and talking about sales to nonprofits versus for-profits, one of the main differentiators. I had a great sales leader who once said, never ask directly, do you have budget for this? Because you're talking nonprofits, like they don't have a budget for anything. And I think one of the things that really made it click in my mind as a new salesperson was someone who explained, imagine you had a nonprofit in your local city or town, and their whole mission was, after school special needs education for kids who need additional developmental work after school. And the whole nonprofit is pick them up in a bus and take them from their school to this school where they can deliver those special needs. And this person was explaining, like, how much do you think is in the budget for them to repair that bus? And you think, like, oh, there's something there. And then they're like, okay, the axle breaks and it's 3 times more than the budget that they had set aside. And his question was like, what's the budget to fix the axle? And the obvious answer is like, there is no budget. It's unlimited. And why? Well, that's the delivery of the mission. If you don't fix that problem, you can't fulfill the mission. So that was a real, to me, clear, like, there is budget and there is authority and there's needs and there's timing, but there's also that piece of it that is around, Charlie, as you were explaining earlier, what are the problems that they're experiencing or likely experiencing that are critical to the delivery of the mission, and walking away or being able to obtain those from the discovery with the client. You may win without uncovering that information, but you're much more likely to wrangle all of that support throughout the sales process if you can touch on those things that are really like, these aren't just problems in that, like, man, it would be a lot better if it was easier to, tag these gifts in a different way. But problems in the sense of, like, if we fail to fix these problems, it's going to mean that we can't grow our nonprofit, deliver our mission, or, in really bad cases, we might have to shutter our doors. So I would say, or my next question would be to Charlie around what are those classic things that you listen for early on in the discovery process, or even as you're going through the sales process, where you start to hear like, oh, these are buying signals, or these are like signals to me that things are going well early on. And they could be, examples that you have, or just generally like the vibe that your prospects are giving off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with understanding, to Kevin's point, what kind of solution do you sell as a salesperson, or what kind of, more or less, how do you address certain problems? I mean, here at Virtuous, we are a rip and replace, meaning they have a current technology in place that they are hitting limitations on. And so therefore, we are coming in and replacing that solution with a more modernized platform that does X, Y, and Z. So being able to understand, like, is the core problems that we're trying to address within the thing that we're trying to rip and replace, or there are other things that are going on within the organization? I think the reality is there's a number of different buying signals. I mean, on our side, if you've got outbound motion, which is, hey, I'm experiencing pain, this is my problem. The simple question to be able to validate that as a buying signal is, you feel this way as a person on this call. Do your other team members feel that same way? Is this a communal problem that everybody feels, that we all have had conversations about internally about potentially solving? Now, on the inbound side of things, someone could have done a bunch of research and they've booked a demo or a discovery call. And so understanding and teasing out, like, is this a qualified person? Majority of that can happen well before you even jump on the call. And so you've got to understand, hey, this is an organization, here's their size, here's their current technology. I understand, the pain points or limitations that might be with that. Do these resonate with you all? But it's still also asking those same questions. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Is this a problem that just you are trying to solve, or is this an executive, internal initiative that everybody wants to solve? Where does this problem rank in priority to other things? So if I've got, yes, this is a problem that I want to solve, and then yes, this is a problem that our whole team wants to solve. Yes, this is a top priority for us that fits into our larger list of things that we're trying to strategically address in 2025. And then from there, asking the question, great, typically, and I love the term typically on discovery calls, because you are the expert, you are the guide taking them on this treasure map journey of being able to help kind of solve their problem. Typically, when organizations have these problems, it's impacting this thing, and this thing. Is this specific person who is responsible for those things also feeling that same pain? And how do we then pull them into a conversation, whether they're joining the first call or it's something that they're, joining in the second call. The biggest buying thing is, do you have an internal champion, as they call it, that is willing to be able to bring the problem that they have to a solutions person like yourself, a salesperson? Do they have the ability to be able to bring you into the larger internal conversation to be able to do more of that discovery? I mean, that's the key thing. If you have someone who's just looking to do a little bit of window shopping and they just want to look around and they're not asking like, hey, how can I get my other person on this call because this is a problem they're facing too, then I would say, again, just that natural give and take and feel of, does this person seem like they're holding back? Or does this person feel like they're wanting to solve these problems and looking for your help in order to be able to solve those problems on their behalf?
And so, Kevin, how, again, going back to I'm assuming all of the call recordings that you've listened to over your years and working in this industry, you start to pick up on those as well. Can you talk a little bit more about those types of feelings that Charlie was talking about there, where they're asking those things at the end, like, when can we set up the next call? Or how does it solve this problem that we haven't talked about yet? What are some other, when you're listening to calls, what are some other buying signals that you're listening to? Or conversely, things that you're hearing where you walk away having to tell the salesperson, like, hey, you might be really excited about this deal, but like, there's no way that you're going to win this business.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a couple of things that I'll just maybe dovetail on something that Charlie mentioned, which was if you're finding somebody that's more guarded, if you're asking for certain things, whether it's information or whether it's access to bring in other people, and they're clearly not engaging there, that's a red flag in a lot of ways. And you need to, as an AE, as a new AE, you're inclined to like follow their lead if they keep going on that path. Charlie used the term typically. As a seasoned AE, you probably know that typically when certain people show up, an executive director, a CFO, your conversations change tone and you have more engaging conversations that allow for, again, an educated decision to be had versus somebody that's just kicking the tires to try and collect information. As an AE, I need to protect my time because I want to go spend time with the folks that are really looking to make change happen. If you're not getting engagement, there's a time and a place to ask, to kind of pause and say, hey, it doesn't feel like we're on the same page. Let's make sure that we're, talking the same language and we're, this is something that you want to do. Typically, and you can use that in a lot of ways. Typically our best evaluations go like this. And you can sort of bring that out. I'm a huge fan of giving them the map. We've talked about this, like, I'm your guide. Give them the map. We're on this call. What are we on this call to do? This is a discovery call. Hey, I'm here to learn about you. You're here to learn about me. At the end of the call, we can sort of determine if it makes sense for us to do another call. Typically, that next call looks like this, which then leads to a demo where we bring in other people. If that sounds fair, let's continue down this path. Give them insight in terms of like where you're going. If you give them the insight and you check in, hey, are we still on the path or are we starting to diverge? That's okay. Like, let's know that up front. If we're still on the path might mean, hey, Charlie, this is the time where we need to really pull Mark in to this conversation. Does that sound fair? Oh, no, we can't do that. Guess what? Red flag. We need to explore why that's the case. It may not make sense for us to move on. You can start to hear that in the tone of voice. Again, when you're listening beyond just like words, you can sort of pick up, especially on Zoom calls now. It used to be where we were just on the phone. I can look at body language and other things, but if they're not willing to do some of those things that are really meaningful to get to an educated decision, and they're not, that to me tells me they're not really interested, or something hasn't clicked, or maybe they're really not in market and they're just kicking tires. All of those things may be okay, but it's also okay for you to stop as an AE and say, hey, it feels like we're maybe not on the same page. Can we just make sure like we're staying on the path, or are we getting off the path? Like there's ways to do that.
Yeah.
I think the other piece that I hear a lot of times with two things I would say about newer AEs. One, they get uncomfortable to ask questions about things they're not comfortable about. Maybe they don't know the answer to it, and so they don't want to go explore it. One place for folks that deal with fundraising solutions, they don't like to talk about accounting, and they don't want to talk about anything that involves the CFO. And they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk about like anything on that side because it's uncomfortable to them. I would just say, as a new AE, you don't need to know all the answers. Ask the questions, be curious. It's okay if they come back with something and you're like, hey, that's a little bit, I don't really know the answer to that, but when we get to the next conversation, I'll make sure that I bring resources to the table to address that. The important thing is that you know that it's an issue or area or what have you. That was one. The second thing, and it just ran out of my mind, was one, be curious, and dang it, it'll come back.
The second one was always remember the points that you're trying to make.
Yes, I should have written it down.
So this we'll kind of wrap up this conversation, because I think now is probably the time, and I don't know if we've talked about it in our previous episodes, Kevin, but now is the time to probably let anyone know who's listening and deals with nonprofits and doesn't yet understand they're some of the nicest people in the world, which means they're not going to say no. They're not going to tell you no. They're not going to tell you stop calling me. They're likely to tell you, like, let me take this back to my leadership and I'll get back to you. And then your newer AEs will come back to you as a sales leader and say, like, I've got a great opportunity. They're going to take it to their leadership and they're going to get back with us. All right, Kevin, what's the second
Happy
point?
years. And you're hitting on it.
Yeah.
Happy years. Does that term, you guys resonated with happy years?
Yeah, you're hearing the things that you want to hear.
Especially for new AEs. They said a word that like set me off. And I remember a very specific call. Great discovery call was going on. This word came up. And I remember the word, it was automation. And boy, he heard automation. I know about automation. Let me tell you about all the automation. And we do automation. And it just like shut down the call. And we listened to that call. I was like, dude, you got happy years right here. And when you hear a word, buzzword or a question or something that comes up and you want to have this like word vomit stuff, stop and ask a question like, why is that important, or what have you. But like happy years for new AEs is like, be cognizant. It may be a good indicator, but like, don't jump in and like try and answer all the things. Ask more questions. It's like the best thing you can do in a discovery or learning process. So
last question then, Charlie, is like, when you evaluate, I know you mentioned discovery is kind of more than just one call. It's part that happens, but that first call that you have as an AE with a stakeholder, a decision maker at an organization, you're pretty convinced that you can help. When you look back at those calls, how do you know that they are successful?
That's a question a different way. I want to make sure I fully understand what you're looking for.
If someone were to listen to your discovery call with a particular client and say, this is successful, or this was a failure, what are they listening for? What are you personally listening for to score this discovery call as like, this is a win, this is successful, it accomplished the mission that we wanted it to accomplish?
Yeah. I think the things for me, when I look at qualification on our side, it's understanding, do we have a problem? Do we recognize that this is not just one person's problem, but an entire team's problem? Do we understand where that problem lives in retrospect to priorities within the organization? I could have the best solution in the world and somebody who wants to solve this problem, but the executive team could say, great, that's number 20 on our larger project list, and we're not going to get to that until another 18 months. So being able to validate all of those things of understanding, here's the problem, we're all stacking hands as a team that this is a problem we're trying to solve. This is a priority for our team, And then also understanding, great, to Kevin's point, typically organizations who have this problem, who have this executive buy-in to solve this problem, who have made this problem solving a priority, typically here's what the framework for solving that problem looks like. Is this a journey that you all want to go on together in order for us to be able to continue the conversation and solve this problem? And I'll ask that question directly because, again, buying technology, buying services, it is a journey, just like buying a home with a real estate agent. It's not just talking to the real estate agent, going online and looking at Zillow, right? I've got to take time out of my day, go to the home, do the walkthrough, go talk to a lender, go do all of these things. And you really want to make sure, like, hey, they have the problem. It is a priority. They're willing to dedicate time and resources to it. And they like the framework for how you all typically solve these problems. And they're open to entering in to that journey to help them solve this problem. That's typically where we're moving somebody into the next stage and being able to set up best next steps in order to help continue the conversation and trying to continue to dissolve how do we want to solve the problem that is currently at hand.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on there and say to the audience and any salesperson who's selling to nonprofits, and especially new salespeople, not to be afraid to ask questions that might lead to them not wanting to continue, because ultimately you'll save yourself time and save them time. And I know as salespeople, we never want to let a qualified buyer walk away, but as you grow and get better at sales, you start to understand that your time is extremely valuable and you want to be engaged with those customers who are willing to buy. So Kevin, you want to put a bow on it?
Well, I just want to another part of that. A no is not a bad answer if it's the right answer, right? And giving your customers and prospects the freedom to say no, and that being okay, is a really healthy environment.
Yeah.
That also later on will reduce the amount of like, hey, I haven't heard from them, or hey, I'm just circling back, like what's the status? If you establish early on that like, hey, if anytime this is not the right fit, it's not the right time, whatever, it's okay. I'm going to be okay. You're going to be okay. I'm helping you make an educated decision. If I've done my job, that's still an answer, and it helps save time, to your point. But it also, especially for new A's that keep stuff in their pipeline and like keep forecasting and rolling it out because they don't know, when your customers and your prospects have the freedom to come and say, you know what, this isn't the right time, we're going to have to pause or whatever, and you be okay with that as an answer, it's a healthy environment to have. So I just wanted to call that out.
Yeah. And I think the thing to just add on to the end of that, people, problem, and priority, bring that up on every single one of your calls. Because it's all too often that you've got a path or plan in order to solve problems. That linear framework is great as a starting point, but as we all know, things change throughout a buying process. So being able to jump on the next call, hey, is this still a problem? Is this still a priority? Are these people still involved? I've had plenty of deals who, yes, yes, and yes on call 1, 2, and 3, you get to call 4. Hey, this person just left. New executive leadership has their own priorities, and we're now not looking to solve this problem for another 12 to 24 months. So understanding that every step of conversation and every step of more or less evaluation, continuing to make sure, hey, are we still on the path? Is this still the problem we're trying to solve? Is this still a top priority? Are these people still wanting to solve these problems? And making sure you're doing, continuous discovery throughout that sales process. That's the difference between a successful AE and someone who's just out there trying to show platform and software or services and just trying to hit quota.
Well, speaking of hitting quota, we're going to let Charlie get to his next sales call, which I'm sure he's going to crush. If people want to learn more about Virtuous to see if the problems that they have as a nonprofit, Charlie can help solve, they can visit virtuous.org, request a demo, put in the notes section that you heard Charlie on this podcast and that you only want to work with him directly. You can also, I'm assuming, Charlie, people can connect with you on LinkedIn. If anyone out there is listening to this and wants to know whether or not the demos that they're scheduling, the discovery calls that they're having, or the team that they have is doing everything that they can in the sales process or need some help with it, they can visit us at constantmethod.com. In addition to this podcast, we're going to have some resources on our website about how to do better discovery with nonprofits. You can also connect with myself and Kevin on LinkedIn. All of these links will be in our show notes. Until next Wednesday, thank you everyone for listening. And Charlie, thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for letting me join.
Thanks, Charlie.